Hello, I'm Sister Joanne Ionati, and I'm Art and Spirituality Coordinator here at Wisdom House Retreat and Conference Center. Wisdom House specializes in programs in spirituality, education, and the arts. And today we're in the Marie-Louise Trichet Art Gallery. This art gallery has been part of Wisdom House since 1994. And we're here today to focus on our new exhibit, the title of which is Short Stories by Florin Firimita. Florin is with us today, and Florin right now lives in Winstead, Connecticut. And we're here to talk about how he came to be the artist he is, and how this particular work that is in this exhibit it came to be as well. So Florin, how did your art life begin?
Well, I think I started when I was 5 or 6. I started painting. I was an introvert. I remember that I didn't like playing outside, and but I liked doodling. I was spent a lot of hours in my house painting and drawing, and actually creating scenarios. I remember I had these toy soldiers and puppets and dolls, and I was just making this miniature stage design, and almost like miniature movie sets. And then my father was a photographer, was an amateur photographer, and he allowed me in the dark room. I think I was 6 years old, and he will let me mix his chemicals, which is very unusual. So I grew up in a dark room, in a way, and that magic, that being in the dark room and seeing all those photographs happening or materializing in front of your eyes, it was very exciting. So I think I like that part of the magic and the ability, the fact that you could make those things happen, and so that's how I started. I didn't know where it came from or what triggered it, but I think it was a lot mainly inspired by my father being a photographer.
That's wonderful. And your mother too, isn't your mother a designer?
My mother was, she wanted to be a fashion designer, and she couldn't because the Russians took over Romania in 1945, and she wanted to go and study. She did finish university. She had a degree in fashion design. And her dream was to go to Paris and become a fashion designer. And of course, in 1945, Russians came over, and all her dreams were shattered. So she worked as a seamstress. She ended up working as a seamstress for many, many, many years. And she was very artistic. So.
Florin has led a very, very interesting life, and the story of his life is in a movie entitled The Art of Leading. And that is another very, very wonderful piece of art in terms of how he became the artist that he is. Well, as I said before, the title of this exhibit is Short Stories. And we thought it would be interesting to you if Florin would explain to you some of the stories behind some of these pieces of art on exhibit here in the gallery.
This piece is called 8 Ways of Forgetting. I had a good friend named Diane who passed away last year, and we used to go to movies, especially after her chemo sections, and I didn't realize that she would not remember the movie that she's seen only an hour before we go to dinner. We'll talk about the movie, and I realized that she couldn't remember anything. And I started this series of pieces in which are about memory and loss, and there was a sadness in that because she would talk to me on the phone, and we'll talk extensively for about an hour, and then she'll call me back half an hour later, and she'll tell me the same thing. She wouldn't remember what we talked about. So I started putting these pieces together in which I've been using the labyrinth which resemble in a way the look of a human brain, and the faces they're basically obliterated by paint, and that's one of the pieces. I didn't use her face. I'm using another friend of mine's face, but it was about loss and memory and time and life and death. This piece is called The Transformation of Anna M. That's my mother's name, and my mother wanted to become a fashion designer. She studied to be a fashion designer back in Bucharest in the 1940s, and of course, after the Nazi Germany defeat, the Russians took over Romania, and they didn't allow anybody to leave the country. And so my mother dreams of becoming a fashion designer turned into nothing. She worked for 25 years as a seamstress in a factory in Bucharest. And when I use symbols and when I use different elements in a piece, sometimes I don't see it myself. I think I have a sense of where I'm going, but sometimes I have friends and people who look at the pieces and they notice things that I haven't initially intended. And one of the symbols is the mannequin. I've been using this old dress mannequin in many pieces, and it's strangely how it resembles in the same time some sort of a cage. And also the mannequin itself, which has to do with fashion. And a friend of mine also pointed out that it is static. You can't really move. You can't move. You can circle around that axis, but you cannot move forward. You cannot do anything about it. So I thought about the symbolism. I think it's just subconsciously I put it in there. I knew all this until other people pointed it out to me. So, and I'm not using my mother's photographs, but it's almost all these found photos that I used, that are people that I never met or they're not related to me. In a sense, they become families. Strangers. It stands up for the memory of my mother, in a sense. This is called Jim's Irish Boat, and I have a good friend of mine who took a photograph. He went to Ireland and he took this great photograph, and I asked him for a permission to use it. And I find all these photographs that I find usually in New York City or in people's shoeboxes that I'm intrigued by the fact that I don't know who they are. So I linked this with the idea of immigration and the Irish and the boat. The boat was actually resting ashore, wasn't in the water, and that was interesting too, which I thought it would be a good metaphor for the immigrant. And the puzzle that it's used as, putting your life back together. So it's a combination of a real landscape and in a sense a spiritual landscape. I was always intrigued by these faces that I'm using, and in a way I felt that, and I still feel that I'm giving them a second life, in a sense, that they've become part of something else. They were rescued in a spiritual sense from a shoebox, and they became part of a work of art, for better or for worse.